आईसीएमआर इंडिया डायबिटीज स्टडीज की तरफ से आने वाले समय में डायबिटीज की रोकथाम को लेकर अलग अलग स्थानों पर इसका डाटा रिलीज किया गया और आज जम्मू में ये डाटा केंद्रीय मंत्री डॉक्टर जितेंद्र सिंह द्वारा रिलीज किया गया और डायबिटीज की रोकथाम के लिए उठाए गए कदमों के बारे में जानकारी दी गई। उन्होंने कहा कि इसमें गवर्नमेंट मेडिकल कॉलेज जम्मू, ऑल इंडिया इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ मेडिकल साइंसेज की तरफ से सहयोग दिया जा रहा है। उन्होंने गैर सरकारी इदारों को भी इसमें योगदान करने की अपील की। डॉक्टर जितेंद्र सिंह ने कहा कि ये हमारा राष्ट्रीय दायित्व है कि हम डायबिटीज से निजात पाने के लिए उचित कदम उठाएं और प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के 2047 के विकसित भारत के सपने को साकार करें। इस मौके पर डॉक्टर वी मोहन, चेयरमैन मैड्रास डायबिटीज रिसर्च फाउंडेशन चेन्नई, नेशनल कोऑर्डिनेटर एंड प्रिंसिपल इन्वेस्टिगेटर ऑफ आईसीएमआर इंडिया डायबिटीज स्टडीज मौजूद थे। इनके अलावा डॉक्टर राजीव कुमार गुप्ता, प्रोफेसर एंड हेड डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ कम्युनिटी मेडिसिन, गवर्नमेंट मेडिकल कॉलेज एंड प्रिंसिपल इन्वेस्टिगेटर ऑफ आईसीएमआर इंडिया डायबिटीज स्टडीज जम्मू व डॉक्टर तनवीर कौर, साइंटिस्ट GNCD डिवीजन, आईसीएमआर हेडक्वार्टर्स न्यू दिल्ली और डॉक्टर आशुतोष गुप्ता, प्रिंसिपल मेडिकल कॉलेज खास तौर पर मौजूद थे।
Well known. For example, he has won the Gold Medal Oration Award from Chitmar Puducherry, and he was the first ever medical profession to be conferred the coveted Jamna Devi Gyan Devi Award for journalism. As a doctor, taking up journalism.
Dr. Rajiv Bali, because we have been asked from Parliament that ICMR did the last survey in 1972, what ICMR is doing now. And we are getting small reports that our diabetic population is increasing. So with that, we started, and there was a lot of criticism that time also that how such a big study is possible. So we started small, we started with the 4 sites. And we see, okay, let us see how it moves. And we had round of discussions with everyone. And we identified, then Director General identified Dr. V. Mohan as the coordinator because of his expertise in this area. And if you recall that this study has been done in phases for the same reason, because it needs unconditional support, financial support, and which ICMR and its previous DGs, like this is the 6th Director General, Dr. Rajiv Bali is in.
For me to be here at the dissemination of Jammu data for the in-depth study. It's also been my privilege to be associated with this study, as Dr. Mohan mentioned, right from the beginning. Right from the planning stage. I remember in Chennai and MDRF when we went to actually plan out the study and how the structure of the survey should be. And ever since then, over the last 15 years, I've been fortunate to be part of the expert group to so-called guide and steer the project across the country. Although Dr. Mohan doesn't require any guidance, he has his own experience, but still it was a pleasure going through the data from time to time and monitoring the project and also guiding and giving inputs wherever possible. Also being part of the monitoring committee, the monitoring team of ICMR that visited several of the places where the study was being conducted. It's a very closely monitored study that, mind you, very few studies would have that rigor of investigation. And I can...
Patients, the number of experts, money, you told there's no dearth of money, but only there is definitely data. Authentic data. And many times the data which we present is not honored because it is not properly collected. And now the things are changing actually. And as you told this data about diabetes, I've been told that the total number of diabetics in the country are more than the population of Brazil. And you told correctly that we have our own set of problems to take care. I'm an oncologist, sir, and similar problems I'm facing about the data. And recently in 2014, we started a hospital-based cancer registry with the help of ICMR, which is running wonderfully well. And on daily basis, all data that the patients we are seeing is being transmitted online to NBCIR at Bangalore, and we are proud to say that our data is now being quoted in many national information journals. And it's a hard job. Dr. Rajiv is also involved in that. And now we want to shift to population-based.
Busy in his family marriage in native place in Bhadrava, so he couldn't be here. The objectives of the study remain, as said earlier by Mohan sir, that prevalence of diabetes mellitus, then IGT and IFG, and to compare prevalence of T2DM in urban and rural areas, and besides other things like hypertension, CAD, and level of diabetes control among the population. So this is the area of Jammu province, where 10 districts were involved, and the sample size was such that all the 10 districts were duly covered. We had 38 PSUs representing 19 rural and 19 urban, and this was the algorithm for the selected patients. 1500 study subjects were chosen for the study, and all the 1500 were administered a structured questionnaire followed by food frequency questionnaire, then anthropometry and blood pressure measurements, and subsample of the population.
And a very precious colleague, Padma Shri Dr. V. Mohan. I am doubly delighted this afternoon, but this program has been organized by him and also dedicated to a concept and the idea which was for the first time floated by him. And it gives me a special joy also to recall that there has been a very close professional as much as a personal association with Dr. V. Mohan and in fact the entire family. He was recalling the Chennai connection. We share a common alma mater in the form of Stanley Medical College. I know how many of you in this room are aware of the fact that his father, the legendary Dr. M. Vishwanath, is still remembered as one of the fathers of diabetology in India. He, along with Professor M.M.S. Ahuja, Professor Sam Moses and some others, were the first to give the concept of diabetology as a separate area of study, research and practice. And I think he was also among the first in Madras, which is now known as Chennai, to have started a nursing home, which was at that time known as the Vijay Nursing Home, and we were students. And incidentally, Dr. V. Mohan of prevention and cure. He was the first, soon after the government came in 2014, in the month of May. Within 6 months, he proposed in the United Nations that we should have an International Yoga Day, and the United Nations accepted it unanimously to have it on the 21st of June. And we have authentic studies to prove that there is a set of yogasanas, Mayurasana, Bhujangasana, Paschimottanasana, Ardha Matsyendrasana, which when practiced regularly might reduce the dose of anti-diabetics, might even reduce the requirement of insulin. Then also the holistic approach, even when insulin was not discussed, and therefore we proved it. But now, how do we reach that 2047 protest? Now we will have to explore all those resources which have remained either underexplored or unexplored. And those resources will come from regions like Jammu and Kashmir. Because we have seen that even many of the scientific work doesn't find enough slot in the media, but the technology is so strong that we don't need it. We conducted a longest ever coastal cleaning campaign in 22 in the world. And we had our own studio set up and our own clippings, because people are watching just 2 minutes video or 30-second reel, which you can produce better. And the access is through that. So we can generate awareness. We can generate awareness through infographics, through information dissemination. Also, these are some of the lesser known facts. And of course, with the kind of access and influence that Dr. V. Mohan has across the society, that could be an asset to all of us. And I think my only hope is that we are able to pick up the right kind of cues from the presentation made by Rajiv, also take the right kind of measures and succeed putting Jammu and Kashmir in the main course of the mainstream journey of India, both in healthcare as well as in a concern of those few in this room. It's a wider concern. And I'm sure each citizen will be able to contribute. That's exactly what is mean envisaged when we talk of the Gold India 2047. Thank you very much for the patient hearing. 50s. Now it's happening in the second decade, third decade. And it was a norm. If you came across a newly detected diabetes, maybe in his 20s, you would immediately put him on insulin, assuming that it was insulin dependent and type 1. But it's no longer so, because in the earlier stages in 1990, we started faltering. Some of the patients started going into hypoglycemia because we would put them on this assumption. Then we realized that they could be cured by metformin. So now that is another issue. And the fourth one, which was highlighted in this study also, is obesity, and more so the central obesity. I was very closely watching the findings. Even in Jammu, he has shown 62-63% of central obesity. Now, all of us know that central obesity per se is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes mellitus, also all the other metabolic disorders, regardless of the overall obesity. And in fact, we did a study in late 90s with Dr. Pune, Dr. Yagnik. We scanned a set of individuals of European origin and Indian origin. We found all the Europeans looked bulky, hefty, but their visceral fat was very little, whereas Indians looked lean and thin, but the fat inside the CAT scan was much higher. And incidentally, the dress culture over here is that you can wear a kurta, you can hide it. You can wear a 6-meter sari, you can hide it. So that is an issue which is not being sufficiently recognized in the Indian context, and I am amazed today. We did a study on central obesity in somewhere around 2003 or 4, and we found that it was around 65-66%, or almost equal in males and females. Here also it's almost equal in males and females. In the presentation made by Rajiv, it's around 62-63%. So that is something which is alarming, because that could be the mother of the other diseases as well. The other part is, because if we realize the genesis, then we would know how to go about preventing it. And we did a paper in JAPI some years back. There's a breakdown in the rural-urban divide and a breakdown in the region divide. When I say region divide, for example, earlier on, type 2 diabetes mellitus was known to be the disease of the South India. That is why the first diabetes center came up in South India. The first center of diabetology in Madras Medical College, with Dr. Seshi as the first head, also began there. It was not that much prevalent over here. And the Kashmiri migrants study, which Dr. V. Mohan was referring to, has a number of case studies where we came across Kashmiri patients who had never heard of diabetes. There's a very interesting case study of a very senior bureaucrat who started feeling suddenly very thirsty. So he told his attendant, don't waste your time, don't waste my time. Each time you find my glass empty, fill it with water. And then when he was detected, he said, no, we never heard about it in Kashmir Valley. And then we tried to dig out from the health department the official prevalence spectrum of Kashmir Valley, and the most common disease at that time were acid peptic disease, hypertension, and bronchitis related because of the heavy prevalence of smoking. People there had not even heard of type 2 diabetes. Now it's equally prevalent. Whether it's north, whether it's south, and you see today, in today's study, I know how many of you have noticed, the prevalence of type 2 diabetes mellitus in this presentation in Jammu is higher than the national prevalence. That is something you have to feel alarmed about. It's 25% and it's 14%. So which is 80, overall 80 what I'm saying. So there is a breakdown now within the regions. No longer it is confined to south. Rather, one day I was delivering a talk somewhere. I said, now it's a democratization of the type 2 diabetes mellitus. You have equally prevalent, nobody is being spared, and nobody can say, look here, I don't have type 2 diabetes mellitus, because we've seen those days when the sugar-free tablets started appearing newly in the market. It was a fashion to carry it in the lady purse. And whenever the tea was served, they would very fondly take out and then tell everybody, have you not stopped sugar? We've stopped. So I think now that is precisely what has happened. And of course, the breakdown in the rural-urban divide was a paper we did in JAPI. That was also about 10-15 years back. And that's again because the lifestyle is now the same. The physical activity is same because even in the rural areas you have use of automobiles. And most of the food products are now being carried from the urban areas into the rural. They are no longer growing their organic food. And therefore, this now also becomes a matter of concern for Jammu and Kashmir. Whereas overall in India, you have 1.1 crore type 2 diabetes mellitus and 1.36 pre-diabetes. Now, the significance here is that even before the symptoms appear or an overt diabetes is detected, you could have affected your organs. You could suffer from a myocardial infarction, you could suffer from an early nephropathy and then only get to know that you actually were a pre-diabetes or diabetes. So, it's become equally important to detect it at this stage, also because, and I think that's again something alarming, overall in the country 70% of mortality today is because of the non-communicable disease. And many of that mortality is contributed by the symptomless factors, symptomless conditions like pre-diabetes. And therefore, and yes, of course, we also once did a small survey where we noticed that every third patient visiting the OPD for any disease, he might go there for an ENT issue or he may even go there for a gynae check, is found to be, when you go through a screening, is found to be having diabetes or pre-diabetes. So that is why it's virtually become an epidemic. And therefore, I always say now it's no longer an issue concerned only with the medical professionals. And I say diabetes is too longer and too serious a problem. It has actually become too serious an issue to be left to a diabetologist alone. It's virtually become a national concern. Also because nowadays we are talking of Viksit Bharat. We are talking of 2047 Bharat. And who are going to be the architects of this 2047? Those who are in the third and fourth decade of their life. So can we afford to let their potentials, their energy be wasted in these silent conditions and drain them out through their target organ damage? So it's become a national responsibility to preserve their potential, to preserve their energies for a better cause. The other part is diabetes in pregnancy, which of course also Dr. V. Mohan referred, because unless we are able to control during pregnancy, the gestational part, we will not be able to break this chain happening from generation to generation. And now one of the groups which has involved me also, we have started a multi-centric study, pre-mordial intervention, though it's not easy. We've chosen Maulana Azad, we've chosen centers from Madras, of course. So that the fetus grows in a milieu with the same physiological environment as or that of a non-diabetic woman or a mother. That's not easy to achieve, but unless we achieve that, we will continue to pass on the preponderance to the next generation. And therefore, to some part, I think at the level of government, what we are doing, because now I have to also talk partly as a minister, if you allow me. Of course, the ICMR has taken up this cause in a big way, which of course again is a government administered agency. Prime Minister Modi, I said he didn't know that I would suddenly switch over the roles. But when it did happen, then I conveyed to him, I said it may not be possible for me to do justice. So we had a junior colleague of ours who's now of course incidentally become a director in Sher-e-Kashmir Institute, Ashraf Ganai. So he had been associated with me in a number of research projects. So I said since he is from endocrinology, he can come handy. But then the problem was that his reach was limited to the valley and he couldn't have accessed this part of the country. And therefore our natural choice was somebody who was an expert in community medicine. And last time I saw him, he was younger. But today he is grown younger still and he's become head.
Sir, last year you awarded me at NAMS, Ramaiya Medical College. I was conferred.
That's right. Oh, in Ramaiya, yeah. There was a conference. But I can just say in single sentence that Rajiv has done a better job than I could have done. Now, before I speak a word about the study per se, see what has typically happened in India today, whether we realize or not, and maybe Now it's no longer the concern of medical fraternity alone. On the one hand, there is a changing disease spectrum. Till about 80s, we were mostly confined with communicable diseases. Most of the mortality also happened with tuberculosis and all the other cholera, etc., etc. But then with the advent of antimicrobials, etc., maybe somewhere in the late 80s and so, this new phase of non-communicable disease, which of course includes type 2 diabetes mellitus, coronary vascular disease, etc., set in. And somebody wrote a humor piece that India now has stepped into an era of civilized diseases, because these were known as the disease of the West at that time. But unfortunately, what has happened is that though we had stepped into an era of non-communicable diseases, the communicable diseases also did not give up chasing us. So now we have a biphasic disease spectrum. And so also in the Western world, because in the West, they had almost become oblivious of problems like tuberculosis, etc. In fact, for many years, we used to get interns from UK for a stint in AIIMS, Delhi, to be posted in the tropical disease wards because they didn't have that. But after the AIDS came in, then they also had an upsurge. So on the one hand, now we have a biphasic, so we are confronted with a very large spectrum. And COVID, of course, heightened this. On the other hand, we have an increased lifespan. At the time of independence, we were just about 55 years, 50 years. Now it's gone up to 66 years, still rising high. And it's always very fanciful, always a fashion to say India is a young country, which is of course rightly so, because 70% of our population is below the age of 40. But I always tell wherever I am among the students and medicos that this is only half the truth of the story. By percentage, we may be more than 70% below the age of 40. But at the same time, the absolute number of plus 60 is also on the increase, which means that the younger population has grown in percentage, but olders and the oldies are not ready to quit the planet. So they are also stable. So again, now we have a biphasic lifespan, which is, this is an expression which I think is appropriate to be used, though it's not in the textbooks. So we have to, upon that, the other issue now, complicating that is, that while people are living long enough to get diseases which they otherwise would not have got because they didn't live up to that age, which includes many of the malignancies. But at the same time, the diseases of the later age have started happening at the younger age. And there comes in type 2 diabetes mellitus. For example, if the type 2 diabetes mellitus was heard of by any clinician about 3-4 decades back, he would think of he would be done so because they did not depend wholly on government. And space sector itself is one of the best examples. We would always compare ourselves to NASA, but we never realized that NASA has almost 70-80% of resource from the non-government sector. So realizing that, we opened up about 4 years back, and now our space startups are the world class. So why I am saying so is, we would also put it across to the state government here. We have taken it up in a big way at the central government. A huge push to the private-public participation. I think that could come in something like government medical college. We should not be hesitant in involving the private sector. At the same time, private sector should also follow some of our priorities. For example, if they are opening up a new corporate, they can open up a small ancillary branch in the rural area. So that is how it would work, because if earlier on, and this government is quite open, and thanks to Prime Minister, because earlier on there was a lot of skepticism between the private and the public. The public sector always thought of the private sector as black marketeers, fleecers. The private sector thought of public officials as bribe takers, as scammers. So there was so much of skepticism. So I was, the other day, addressing a student, I said, when you board a bus, because now there are better means of travel, but in our times it's mainly the bus. तो उस बस में महात्मा भी बैठता है, गुंडा भी बैठता है, चोर भी बैठता है, डाकू भी बैठता है. So you have sadhu sitting there, you have shaitan sitting there. You have sinner sitting there, you have virtuous sitting there. But suddenly when the bus breaks down, the tire gets punctured, which used to happen very often in my and your times, then what does happen? everybody gets down and starts pushing the bus. They forget who is each other's vices because the destination is common, the objective is common. So if we have to achieve this objective, achieve this effectively, we have to give up these barriers of the public-private. And why I am saying so is that we have walked the talk. Just about 3 months back, we came out with the National Research Foundation through the Ministry of Science and Technology. Also, we are the first in the world, among the first. Only America had one, that is called National Research Society. Germany has one. We have come out with a better version. And very consciously, not only 70% of the resources from the private sector, we have also given representation not only exclusively to the scientific fraternity, but also to humanities, to social groups, to also human resource development, who can give a flavor of our culture, our context, while planning our scientific programs, who could also design our project structure befitting the requirements across the world, and also could advise on what kind of collaboration do we have. Because if we are thinking of Viksit Bharat, easily said than done, then we have to live up to global challenges. We have to have global parameters. We have to have global strategies. And there also we have started making headway. We were in Global Innovation Index, we were just 81 10 years back. Now we've jumped 41 places. And startup ecosystem, we were nowhere. Today we are ranked 3 in the world. So that means we have the capacity of doing so. There was possibly not enough of support from the levels of the policy makers or the government, which is now happening. And therefore, from the point of Jammu and Kashmir, I think this is also one of the better times happening, because I can foresee that J&K hereafter is going to contribute to the overall growth story of India. And as I said, I am not saying, the point is, when we talk of rising to that pedestal 2047, most of us talk like politicians, most of us talk like public speakers. But when we talk of it as scientists, how do you rationalize it? From fragile 5, we are now top 5. 10 years back, we were fragile 5 economies, and it was said that any time they will be going haywire. But in COVID, we did better than many of the other economies. Done so because they did not depend wholly on government. And space sector itself is one of the best examples. We would always compare ourselves to NASA, but we never realized that NASA has almost 70–80% of resource from the non-government sector. So realizing that, we opened up about 4 years back, and now our space startups are the world class. So why I am saying so is, we would also put it across to the state government here. We have taken it up in a big way at the central government. A huge push to the private-public participation. I think that could come in something like government medical college. We should not be hesitant in involving the private sector. At the same time, private sector should also follow some of our priorities. For example, if they are opening up a new corporate, they can open up a small ancillary branch in the rural area. So that is how it would work. Because if earlier on, and this government is quite open, and thanks to Prime Minister, because earlier on there was a lot of skepticism between the private and the public. The public sector always thought of the private sector as black marketeers, fleecers. The private sector thought of public officials as bribe takers, as scammers. So there was so much of skepticism. So I was, the other day, addressing a student, I said, when you board a bus, because now there are better means of travel, but in our times it's mainly the bus. तो उस बस में महात्मा भी बैठता है, गुंडा भी बैठता है, चोर भी बैठता है, डाकू भी बैठता है. So you have sadhu sitting there, you have shaitan sitting there. You have sinner sitting there, you have virtuous sitting there. But suddenly when the bus breaks down, the tire gets punctured, which used to happen very often in my and your times, then what does happen? Everybody gets down and starts pushing the bus. They forget who is each other's vices because the destination is common, the objective is common. So if we have to achieve this objective, achieve this effectively, we have to give up these barriers of the public-private. And why I am saying so is that we have walked the talk. Just about 3 months back, we came out with the National Research Foundation through the Ministry of Science and Technology. Also, we are the first in the world, among the first. Only America had one, that is called National Research Society. Germany has one. We have come out with a better version. And very consciously, not only 70% of the resources from the private sector, we have also given representation not only exclusively to the scientific fraternity, but also to humanities, to also to social groups, to also human resource development, who can give a flavor of our culture, our context, while planning our scientific programs, who could also design our project structure befitting the requirements across the world, and also could advise on what kind of collaboration do we have. Because if we are thinking of Viksit Bharat, easily said than done, then we have to live up to global challenges. We have to have global parameters. We have to have global strategies. And there also we have started making headway. We were in Global Innovation Index, we were just 81 10 years back. Now we've done 41 places. And startup ecosystem, we were nowhere. Today we are ranked 3 in the world. So that means we have the capacity of doing so. There was possibly not enough of support from the levels of the policy makers or the government, which is now happening. And therefore, from the point of Jammu and Kashmir, I think this is also one of the better times happening, because I can foresee that J&K hereafter is going to contribute to the overall growth story of India. And as I said, I am not saying, the point is, when we talk of rising to that pedestal 2047, most of us talk like politicians, most of us talk like public speakers. But when we talk of it as scientists, how do you rationalize it? From fragile 5, we are now top 5. 10 years back, we were fragile 5 economies, and it was said that any time they will be going haywire. But in COVID, we did better than many of the other
के चेयरमैन हमारे बीच हैं, और इनकी पहल से एक देशव्यापी डायबिटीज का एक स्टडी का शुरुआत किया गया था, जो विश्व की सबसे बड़ी स्टडी है, और ICMR के सौजन्य से उस स्टडी को मुकम्मल किया गया। ICMR इंडिया डायबिटीज स्टडी, और इसके जो आंकड़े निकले हैं, जो इसका डाटा निकला है, उसका बड़ा व्यापक तौर पर उसका प्रकाशन हुआ है। उसको संबंधित संस्थाओं ने उसका संज्ञान लिया है, किस प्रकार से आने वाले समय में डायबिटीज की रोकथाम की जा सकती है देश में। उसको अलग अलग चरणों में उस डाटा को रिलीज किया गया। दक्षिण भारत का डाटा पहले से रिलीज हो चुका था, उत्तर भारत के कुछ प्रदेशों का हो चुका था। अब जम्मू कश्मीर की बारी थी, तो हमारा ये सुझाव था कि इसका जम्मू का डाटा जम्मू से ही रिलीज किया जाए। आने वाले समय में फिर कश्मीर और लद्दाख का भी रहेगा, और उसमें जहां पर कि ये पाया गया कि कुल मिलाकर के देश भर में लगभग 16-17% डायबिटीज पाया जाता है। जम्मू के 10 जिलों में उसकी औसतन लगभग उतनी थी या थोड़ी ज़्यादा थी, 17-18 तक। तो जो एक विषय ऐसा है कि जिसका संज्ञान लेकर के आने वाले समय में हमें रोकथाम के कार्यों में भाग लेना पड़ेगा। हमारा गवर्नमेंट मेडिकल कॉलेज जम्मू भी इसमें सहयोग कर रहा है, ऑल इंडिया इंस्टीट्यूट मेडिकल साइंसेज जम्मू भी इसमें सहयोग कर रहा है। बहुत जल्द हमारी नई सरकार बनी है, उनके साथ भी इसकी चर्चा होगी, और मैं ये चाहूँगा कि जो गैर सरकारी अदारे हैं वो भी इसमें अपना योगदान दें, क्योंकि डायबिटीज इज़ टू सीरियस टू बी लेफ्ट ओनली टू गवर्नमेंट। ये हमारा एक राष्ट्रीय दायित्व है। जैसे बार बार प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी कहते हैं कि सन 2047 विकसित भारत जब उस शिखर पटल पर पहुंचेगा और हम अपना शताब्दी उत्सव मनाएंगे, तो वो तभी संभव होगा कि प्रत्येक नागरिक अपनी भरपूर क्षमता, अपनी भरपूर ऊर्जा से उस शताब्दी भारत के निर्माण में, उसकी रचना में अपना योगदान कर सके। और जब युवावस्था में डायबिटीज जैसे रोग हों और उसके साथ संबंधित रोग हों, तो युवाओं की ऊर्जा, उनकी क्षमता बजाय राष्ट्रहित के कार्य में लग पाए, दूसरी तरह से कहीं जाया जाए, इसके लिए और इसकी रोकथाम करना यह हम सबकी एक सामूहिक जिम्मेवारी है।